Good morning, everyone. First, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting on today and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging, and also thank everyone for sharing their perspectives and stories on that this morning. So my name is Nicola Fuller. I'm the team leader, Flora and Weeds at the Lord Howe Island board, and I'm joined by my colleague, Cristina Venables, the team leader, Environment and World Heritage. So we'll be sharing our experiences responding to an incursion of myrtle rust on the island this year. So first off, just some context. Lord Howe is roughly 700 kilometres northeast of Sydney. It's 1,455 hectares in area, so roughly 12 k's long and 3 kilometres at its widest point. We work for the Lord Howe Island board, so this is the main government organisation on the island. It's got a lot of the functions of a local government, but also state and federal responsibilities as well. It's part of New South Wales, but we also have our own legislation, the Lord Howe Island Act from 1953. And 75% of the island is Permanent Park Preserve, or PPP, which is essentially equivalent to National Park. So there's a resident population of only 450 people, as well as a cap on tourists, so 400 are allowed on at any one time just to limit impact to the natural environment. It was World Heritage listed in 1982 and has a really successful conservation history with a big focus on removing invasive pest species. So just a snapshot of the vegetation. As an isolated island, there are high levels of endemism. So we have 241 native vascular plant species, 47% of which are endemic. So there are only 5 Myrtaceae species, 2 Metrosideros, a Melaleuca and a Leptospermum and Syzygium, but these are pretty widespread throughout our vegetation communities, particularly in the southern mountains and the critically endangered ecological community, the gnarled mossy cloud forest. So on top of this, there's also roughly 40 introduced Myrtaceae species. So these are primarily in gardens in the settlement area, but also include some invasive species in the PPP as well. So this is a little timeline. And from the time that myrtle rust was first discovered on mainland Australia, there was a concerted effort from management on the island to prepare us for its arrival. And I think these preparations were really pivotal for both the 2016 and 2023 incursions. So in 2011, they ran susceptibility tests with the CSIRO with the Lord Howe Island species. In 2012, we had Bob Mackinson come over and run some identification training with Lord Howe Island board staff and community. In 2013, we installed boot scrub bays at the trackheads for all of the walks to stop any potential pathogens entering the park. And in 2014, the plant importation policy and strategy were both updated and the import of Myrtaceae species was prohibited. They also developed a myrtle rust response plan in 2015, which was pretty timely because in 2016 it was first detected on the island. So this was first identified by a leaseholder. It was found at 2 properties, both times on a rose apple, and it was treated. The island was searched. They didn't detect it anywhere further, and it was not seen again until the 3rd of February this year. So it was, again, reported by a leaseholder, and the identification was confirmed by LHIB staff. So it was found at an initial property and the adjoining property. It was on exotic species, so a bottlebrush and pudakawa. Straight away, we restricted access to the plants and communicated the risk of potentially spreading the pathogen to the leaseholders. We developed a field data collection app on the first day. So we were entering all of our search data into that from day one of the response, which I think was also really important. We identified high priority areas to search and started searching those right away. So we searched the nursery, so all the adjoining properties, and also some plantings that had high levels of Myrtaceae species in them. We sent out comms to the community to alert them of the incursion, and we also set up our expert panel many of whom are in this room today, and yeah, their advice throughout the whole response was absolutely critical to what we did. So this is just a little output from our field data collection. So the really high concentration of pink points is all of our search data from the settlement. So not one point, or one point can represent many plants rather than just one, and that was where the focus of our initial response was, because that's where we were finding motor rust. We then moved out to the PPP and expanded that search when time permitted us to do that. So within the first fortnight, we had searched and mapped all Myrtaceae species in the settlement, so that was 2,300 plants within the first week. After that first week of searches, we did unfortunately find a third property with myrtle rust infected plants on the 10th of Feb. We treated all of the infected leases with fungicide and preventatively sprayed neighbouring blocks where that was appropriate or feasible. We restricted access to known sites and implemented additional hygiene measures, so adding boot scrub bays to those sites, providing leaseholders with metho to spray their boots down, and having really strict hygiene protocols for our staff going in and out. We also had a really big focus on education and awareness raising, so we presented to all of our staff at the board, which is roughly 60 people, on the identification of myrtle rust and the risks associated, and developed informative posters to put around the island and at all the trackheads. We alerted the incoming researchers of the threat and asked them to take extra biosecurity precautions, and we also requested some support from National Parks and Wildlife Services because we realised we were going to be pretty busy for the next couple of months. So again, this is just another map showing a bit of the effort. We've got the settlement area outlined there, so all of those green points are monitoring points of Myrtaceae species. The orange points are where we detected myrtle rust, so there were a further 2 properties down south that were found later on in the response. And all of the purple areas are where we treated with fungicide, so whether that was preventatively or curatively. Yep, so I'll pass over to Cristina.
All right, so as we went through the searches and we started to find myrtle rust down south, we realized it was within 250 meters now of the PPP, and it was vegetatively connected. So we decided to close the PPP to help protect it and also give us the time and the manpower to start searching there as well too. So we developed this threat status map, which looked at mapping all of the vegetation communities where there was a high number of Myrtaceae species, and then also looking at the threatened status of that vegetation community and coming up with this risk map. So as you can see in the southern area, there's a lot higher risk of myrtle rust potentially having larger impacts. So our treatment strategy was just trying to get on things as quickly as possible. As soon as any new infections were detected, we did start to treat with fungicides. There were 3 to 4 treatments of alternating fungicides for every infected plant. Plants were then stem injected that had been infected and removed. Any new growth was removed from the plant as well and solarized. The plan was to solarize all of the plants, however, the biomass would have been massive, so we did need to come up with an alternative method. And so once the plant was fully dead, it had been treated multiple times with fungicide, we did fell the tree and chipper it, and the wood chips were to remain on site for a minimum of 3 months, so they weren't moved. Community education and involvement was also really important throughout our treatment. We did presentations at the public hall, numerous emails to the community, information packs, one-on-one meetings with Lord Howe Island Tourism, tour operators, lodges, to help us with any myrtle rust sightings so that as soon as anything was seen, we could jump on it. So just a quick snapshot of some of our efforts. 13 different species were treated, 254 plants were killed or removed. We did only find 23 infected plants, but 603 were sprayed with fungicide. And you can see the majority of the species infected were bottlebrush or Pohutukawa. And again, some more stats from our response effort just to show how much time and effort was put into this. Of note, 12,547 Myrtaceae plants were inspected, and it equated to 556 people days inspecting those plants. So what we learned is community and education was really pivotal. The early identification of myrtle rust helped us to get on it and contain. Oh, thank you. The rapid response was really essential, treating the plants as soon as possible to prevent the spread. Mapping our Myrtaceae species was really important to ensure that we weren't missing potential new infections. We were getting on them as quickly as possible, and will also help in future for future incursions, and as well help us identify exotic Myrtaceae species to target for removal. It's really critical for us to protect our endemic Myrtaceae species. There are only 5, but as Nicola said, they're everywhere, and we don't have ex situ populations for them outside of Lord Howe yet, at least not all of them. That understanding that the threat of incursion is definitely going to happen again. We can do things to reduce it, but we can't stop it. And that we were incredibly lucky during both incursions. So some of the future opportunities that we're looking for is to continue that communication and education with visitors and tour operators and the local community to ensure that vigilance is maintained and biosecurity precautions are taken. Improving the biosecurity measures before visitors even arrive to the island, so try and remove the human vector as much as possible. As I said, the collection of germplasm and establishment of ex situ populations. Looking at improving our monitoring and early detection methods. So I've been really interested to speak to a lot of you who are here today. Other novel methods for remote treatment of myrtle rust. As you could see from the island, it's very mountainous. If myrtle rust ever got into the PPP, our current treatment methods would be completely prohibitive. So we couldn't have done anything. And yeah, looking to sample and analyze rust loads in the air, including sporulation and atmospheric modeling and mapping, and predictions of other potential plant pathogens. The foresight that we had to do the preparation that we did around myrtle rust was really great, and making sure that we stay on top of anything else in the future.
Just great talk. Really interested to know, did you have any feedback from the community around, especially your fungicide spraying? You know, often there's some form of communication sometimes.
Yeah, so we do have a pesticide use notification plan, sorry. So we did try and let the community know ahead of time when we were going to be spraying in public areas. Signs were always put out ahead of time telling what we were using and at what concentrations.
We had our crews starting at 5 a.m. to avoid running into people. There was obviously some pushback. I don't think you can use pesticides anywhere without that, but we did it as fairly as possible. And yeah, people really did understand the threat.
Yep.
So we're mainly for it.
Thanks.
Yeah, so obviously you can never get 100% follow through with requests, but we have always had advice to our own contractors and volunteers to launder all their clothes and spray all their gear with metho. We do have a biosecurity checklist that one of the airlines and a lot of the travel agents do send out to guests, so it does advise them to spray their outdoor gear and shoes and everything with metho and to bring laundered clothes. We can't force people to do that, but in the height of the response, we did have someone greeting all passengers at the airport, spraying them down, having the boot scrub bay placed there and just educating them so that they were able to do it if they wished. We made the metho spray available at all of the transit lounges at the lodges so that they had access to that. And we're also getting we do still have like a boot scrub bay, but we're just going to get some mats at the airport to make it a bit more streamlined.
Yeah. So we... It's sprayed properly,
Yeah.
effective. Yep. That was the advice. Yep.
But there's,
Yeah, and we know that there are still some gaps. There's more that we can be doing, and that's our plan in the future, is to tighten up those biosecurity messages, to try and get people to do that voluntary compliance and make sure everything's clean before they arrive.